In the distant future, humanity has spread far beyond Earth, colonizing hundreds of planets, forging alliances with countless alien species, and establishing a thriving intergalactic presence. For centuries, humans had prospered, carving out their place in the vast expanse of the galaxy. On the surface, everything appeared peaceful. The united human colonies, flourishing under the banner of progress and cooperation, seemed invincible. But all of this was about to change in a way that no one could have anticipated. From the deepest recesses of uncharted space, a shadowy and powerful race known as the Draxa emerged. The Draxa were unlike any species humanity had encountered before, ancient, ruthless, and technologically superior in ways that seemed almost beyond comprehension. These beings, who had conquered countless civilizations in their quest for dominance, had always believed themselves to be the apex predators of the universe. They had never considered humanity a serious threat, dismissing the human race as an unremarkable species among many. But the Draxa were about to learn a very harsh lesson. Their first strike came suddenly, like a bolt of lightning across the sky. Massive fleets of Draxa warships arrived at the outermost human colonies without warning, their attack brutal and overwhelming. The Draxa's technology was far more advanced, their weapons capable of obliterating entire cities with a single strike. It was a calculated blitzkrieg, swift, efficient, and devastating. The human military, though proud and seasoned from years of defending their territories, was completely unprepared for such an assault. Colonies that had once stood as symbols of humanity's triumph fell in the blink of an eye, their defiance crushed under the weight of Draxa firepower. Within days, entire human fleets were decimated, and the survivors retreated into the darkness of space, their options running thin. Desperation began to spread, and fear began to take root among the people. The Draxa, with their overwhelming might, were on the verge of annihilating humanity. It seemed as though the universe would soon forget the name of Earth, and humanity would be just another fallen empire in the pages of history. But there was something the Draxa had overlooked, something they had failed to recognize in their arrogance. As the dust settled and humanity began to regroup, one figure stood out from the chaos. Captain Isabella Holt, the head of the human fleet's command center, was not one to bow to defeat. Holt, a seasoned officer with years of experience in military strategy, knew that the situation was dire, but she also knew that humans had something that the Draxa didn't fully understand. There were depths to humanity's spirit that had yet to be unleashed. The Draxa, in their blind confidence, had underestimated humanity's potential. They thought humans were just another species to conquer, just another enemy to be brushed aside. But Holt had seen something different. She noticed the strange patterns emerging in the surviving human forces, coordinated strikes, unexpected maneuvers, and tactics that seemed eerily familiar, as if they had been used by humans long ago. It was as if a hidden part of humanity's ancient past was stirring, something locked away deep within their collective memory. Holt felt a growing sense of unease. Something was awakening in the human race, something that had been dormant for centuries. She began to dive deeper into the history of humanity, seeking answers from old records, myths, and forgotten legends. She uncovered stories of a time long past, an era when humans were known throughout the galaxy not just as survivors, but as fierce warriors capable of taking on the most powerful species in existence. It was said that humanity's ancestors had been trained by gods of war, masters of combat and strategy, but forged weapons of unimaginable power. But, after a cataclysmic event, that knowledge had been lost. The war gods of humanity had been forgotten, their teachings buried in the ruins of a forgotten time. Holt couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was on the verge of discovering the truth about humanity, something far beyond the simple species the Draxa had assumed them to be. The more Holt investigated, the more she realized that the human race was not as weak as the Draxa had believed. The ancient warriors, the war gods, had left behind hidden knowledge, technology, and strategies designed for a day like this. Humanity's true strength was not just in their weapons or their technology, but in their capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and adaptation. It had always been there, buried in the genes of every human, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Holt's suspicions were confirmed when a small faction of human survivors, led by Admiral Jonathan Reyes, made a bold move. Using nothing more than the scraps of destroyed Draxar ships, they managed to reverse engineer an experimental weapon, one that had the potential to turn the tide of the war. But the weapon was not just a physical object, it was the embodiment of humanity's spirit, its ingenuity, and its refusal to accept defeat. Holt saw it for what it was, a sign that humanity was waking up, remembering its roots as warriors of old. The Draxar were about to face a new enemy, one they had never encountered before, a species that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right time to rise. The war was far from over. Humanity's survival would not come at the hands of superior firepower, but from a strength that lay deep within their very being, one that no alien species could ever truly comprehend. As Captain Holt looked out across the dark expanse of space, she knew that humanity was on the edge of something far greater than survival. They were on the verge of rediscovering what it meant to be the war gods of the stars. The first part of the story closes with Holt's resolve hardening. The Draxar might have struck first, but humanity's revenge would be inevitable. They had underestimated humanity once, and they would not make the same mistake again. As the war against the Draxar raged on, humanity found itself in a desperate fight for survival. Captain Isabella Holt, though resolute in her leadership, could feel the weight of their impending doom pressing upon her. The Draxar's relentless attacks were growing more brutal with every passing day, and humanity's remaining forces were spread thin across the galaxy. But amidst the chaos, Holt had an undeniable conviction. There was something hidden within humanity's history, a secret that could turn the tide of this war. For days, Holt gathered a diverse group of historians, scientists, and engineers, some of the brightest minds humanity had to offer, hoping they could unearth something long forgotten. They pored over ancient texts, scoured long-forgotten space archives, and meticulously studied any piece of knowledge that could give them an edge. What they discovered was nothing short of astonishing. Humanity was not just a fledgling species struggling for survival. It was the descendant of an ancient, almost godlike race of warriors known as the war gods of the stars. Centuries ago, long before humanity's golden age of exploration and colonization, the ancestors of humans had been masters of the stars. They wielded technology far more advanced than anything seen in the present era. The war gods had conquered galaxies, defeated entire alien civilizations, and wielded power that could reshape the very fabric of the universe itself. But this power was lost, buried in the ruins of an ancient cataclysm that shattered their empire and scattered humanity to the farthest reaches of space. For millennia, humanity had forgotten its origins, until now. Among the many legends Holt's team uncovered, one stood out above the rest. The war gods had possessed a weaponry known as the Star-Forged technology. These weapons were said to be indestructible, capable of altering the laws of space and time. It was said that the very fabric of reality could be bent by these weapons, an unimaginable force that could annihilate entire star systems or bend them to the will of their wielders. But as the legends went, the weapons were hidden away across the galaxy, scattered and locked behind layers of ancient traps, safeguards, and lost civilizations. The war gods had feared that such power could fall into the wrong hands, so they deliberately kept it away from the knowledge of the universe, leaving it for only those worthy of wielding it. As Holt and her team pieced together the fragments of ancient knowledge, a chilling realization set in. Humanity was not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to reclaim a power that had been lost for centuries, and with it, the future of their species hung in the balance. The Draxar, unaware of what they were truly up against, were determined to crush humanity once and for all. But Holt now understood something fundamental. Humanity's true strength had always been its ability to adapt, to learn, and to evolve. They were more than just a species on the brink of extinction. They were the inheritors of the war god's legacy, And with that legacy came a power that no one, not even the mighty Draxa, could have foreseen. Captain Holt knew she had to act fast. The Draxa were closing in on Earth's final defenses, preparing for a decisive strike that could wipe out humanity in one fell swoop. But Holt, armed with this newfound knowledge, launched a covert mission to rediscover the lost Starforged weapons before the Draxa could complete their conquest. She knew that these weapons were not only humanity's best chance for survival, but the key to winning the war. The mission would not be easy. These weapons were hidden deep within the galaxy, in places so remote and dangerous that only the bravest, perhaps even the most reckless, would dare venture into their depths. The first stop on Holt's mission was an ancient planet, now little more than a lifeless rock orbiting a dying star. It had once been the capital of the war god's civilization, and according to the ancient texts, a Starforged weapon was said to be buried within its ruins. As Holt and her team descended into the planet's ruins, they uncovered intricate carvings on the walls of long-forgotten temples. These carvings depicted the war gods in their full glory, immense, towering figures, wielding weapons that glowed with an unnatural light. The carvings also revealed clues to the locations of other hidden weapons, their true nature carefully concealed from the eyes of any who might seek to use them for selfish purposes. But as Holt and her team ventured deeper into the ruins, they soon realized they were not alone. Someone, or something, was watching them. Hidden in the shadows, the remnants of an ancient defense system still functioned, and they were far from welcoming. As the team moved further into the heart of the ruined city, the once grand halls now echoing with the sound of their boots on cracked stone, they were ambushed by mechanical sentinels left behind by the war gods to guard their greatest treasures. The battle that ensued was nothing short of a test of humanity's resilience. The Sentinels were powerful, nearly indestructible machines, and Holt's team was forced to fight with every ounce of strength they had. In the chaos of the battle, Holt's team finally uncovered the first of the Starforged weapons, a shimmering blade, glowing with an ethereal blue light. The weapon was more than just a tool of destruction. It hummed with ancient power, and for a brief moment, Holt felt as if she had touched the very essence of the war gods themselves. But this was just the beginning. They had only uncovered a fraction of the weaponry scattered across the galaxy, and the Draxa were fast approaching. Time was running out. Holt's resolve hardened as she realized the weight of what lay ahead. The Starforged weapons were not just relics of the past. They were humanity's salvation. The legacy of the war gods was humanity's last hope, and Holt was determined to reclaim it. She would not allow the Draxa to wipe out everything humanity had built. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and humanity's hidden strength, buried for centuries, was about to rise again. As Holt and her team prepared for their next mission, she couldn't help but think of the legends. They were no longer just stories. Humanity was about to prove that they were the true heirs to the war gods. And the Draxa would soon learn that they had underestimated humanity's strength, and that their war was far from over. The hunt for the Starforged weapons had only just begun. Captain Isabella Holt and her team stood in awe before the Aegis Prime, humanity's first Starforged weapon. They had uncovered this massive warship in the ruins of an ancient, forgotten space station hidden in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The Aegis Prime was no ordinary starship. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, a sentient behemoth capable of bending the very fabric of space to its will. As Holt and her engineers carefully worked to awaken the ship's dormant systems, they were astounded to discover that it was powered by an artificial intelligence, one that had been imbued with the knowledge and strategies of the war gods themselves. This was not just a machine, it was an ancient mind, one that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and had been waiting for the day when humanity would once again be worthy of wielding such power. The Aegis Prime's AI, after centuries of slumber, seemed to recognize Holt and her crew, immediately beginning to interface with them as if they were long-lost kin. As they brought the ship to life, its vast systems hummed with energy, and it seemed to awaken with a quiet but intense presence, as though it remembered its purpose, to protect humanity and to lead them to victory. But Holt soon realized that the Aegis Prime was just the beginning. The ancient records she had uncovered spoke of an entire fleet of star-forged warships scattered across the galaxy, each one more powerful than anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The ship was a key to unlocking the long-lost might of the war gods. Each vessel held within it weapons, technologies, and strategies that had once been used to dominate the stars. But they were not the only secret the war gods had left behind. There were other artifacts, hidden technologies capable of turning the tide of any war. With each discovery, Holt's conviction grew stronger. Humanity's true strength had been concealed for a reason, and now it was their time to rise again. The question, however, was whether they would have enough time to awaken the rest of these weapons before the Draxa reached Earth. As the Draxa forces advanced deeper into human space, the situation became increasingly dire. The Draxa, once confident in their near-invincible power, began to realize that something was different. The humans they had underestimated for so long were now striking back with an intensity and precision that defied all expectations. The human fleet, now equipped with the Starforged weaponry, was no longer the ragtag group it had once been. It had become a force to be reckoned with, led by Captain Holt aboard the Aegis Prime herself. The Aegis Prime, with its sentient AI, provided them with an edge they had never known. It was not just a warship. It was a living weapon, one that could think, adapt, and plan like a master strategist. The AI tapped into the ancient tactics of the war gods, offering Holt and her fleet an advantage that was almost impossible to counter. Under Holt's leadership, the human fleet began to employ strategies that left the Draxa reeling. The humans, once thought to be primitive, were now using cutting-edge technology and ancient war tactics to outmaneuver their enemies. Captain Holt, a master of both the modern and ancient methods of warfare, commanded the Aegis Prime with a brilliance that mirrored the war gods of old. She led daring raids against the Draxa's supply lines, disrupted their command structures, and hit them where they least expected. The Draxa, for the first time since the war began to feel the sting of defeat. What had once been a one-sided battle was now becoming a war of attrition, with humanity gradually gaining the upper hand. As the conflict continued, the Draxa found themselves struggling to keep up with the sheer unpredictability of humanity's tactics. The humans were no longer fighting on the defensive. They were taking the fight to the Draxa, attacking their most vulnerable points and causing massive disruptions in their fleet. The Draxa, who had once believed that their technological superiority would guarantee victory, began to rethink their entire approach. They had never expected humanity to be capable of such rapid adaptation, of learning from their mistakes and evolving faster than any enemy they had ever encountered. The Draxa had expected a long, brutal war, but what they found instead was a race against time, one in which they were slowly being outpaced by a species they had once dismissed as primitive. With every battle, humanity's reputation grew. The once scattered human fleets, now united under a single banner, began to make history. News of their victory spread across the galaxy, and the universe started to take notice. The Draxa, with all their power and pride, were being pushed back by the very species they had fought to crush. The whispers began. The humans were not just survivors. They were the descendants of the war gods, wielding weapons and knowledge that were beyond even the most advanced civilizations. The Aegis Prime, a living legend in its own right, became a symbol of humanity's resurgence. It was no longer just a warship. It was a harbinger of the humans' return to dominance. The galaxy watched in awe as humanity began to turn the tide of the war. With their newfound power, the human fleet began to win battle after battle. They were no longer the underdogs. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the Draxa, who had once been so confident in their inevitable victory, now found themselves on the defensive. The humans, driven by an ancient legacy and a desire for survival, fought with a ferocity that no one had ever expected. The war gods of the stars had returned, not as distant legends, but as living, breathing warriors ready to reclaim their place among the stars. The Draxa would soon learn what it truly meant to face the hidden war gods of the galaxy, and they would soon realize that humanity's revenge was not only inevitable, it was unstoppable. As the war continued to shift in humanity's favor, the Draxa, who once seemed invincible, found themselves forced to retreat to their homeworld deep within their empire's core. For the first time, they were on the back foot, their lines fractured and morale shaken. Humanity's fleet, bolstered by the ancient Starforged technology, had become a force so formidable that even the Draxa could no longer ignore it. But for Captain Isabella Holt, victory was not about waiting for the Draxa to regroup. It was about ending the war once and for all. She knew that the Draxa's retreat was just another opportunity for them to rally and fight back. Humanity needed to strike now, to hit at the very heart of the Draxa Empire before they could recover. With her ship, the Aegis Prime, now fully awakened and her fleet armed with the most advanced weapons ever conceived, Holt made a decision that would change the course of the entire conflict. Captain Holt, with her experienced commanders and a hand-picked crew, led a daring raid that would take them deep into Draxa-controlled space. Their target was the capital of the Draxa Empire, their central command station, a heavily fortified structure surrounded by layers of defense. The Draxa had never anticipated an attack of this scale, especially not from humanity, a species they had long considered weak and primitive. But they underestimated the power of the Starforged technology, the weapons that had once belonged to humanity's ancient ancestors, the war gods. As Holt's fleet advanced, they used every ounce of the tactical genius inherited from those warlords of the past. The Draxa, accustomed to their overwhelming power, were unprepared for the audacity of the human assault. The battle raged on for days, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Draxa, despite their vast technological superiority, struggled to deal with the precision and innovation of humanity's tactics. Holt commanded her forces with an unshakable resolve, using strategies that seemed impossible, hit-and-run attacks, feints, and ambushes that kept the Draxa commanders guessing at every turn. The power of the Starforged weapons was evident in every strike, with humanity's fleets tearing through the Draxa's defenses, their advanced ships cutting through the enemy lines like a blade through paper. As the human forces closed in on the Draxa capital, the stakes became higher than ever. Holt herself piloted the Aegis Prime, leading the final charge towards the heart of the Draxa Empire. It was a last-ditch effort to cripple their leadership and seize control of their most vital systems. Humanity was not just aiming for a military victory, it was targeting the very foundation of the Draxa war machine. The Starforged weapons, long dormant and hidden away, now proved their worth in ways that no one could have imagined. By channeling their immense power, humanity was able to disable the Draxa's central command, severing their communications and throwing their fleets into disarray. In that moment, the full potential of the Starforged technology became clear. These were not just tools of war, they were the key to unlocking the power of entire star systems. By manipulating the energy of the weapons, humanity could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. The Draxa, who had once believed they were invincible, now found themselves at the mercy of the very species they had tried to destroy. The warlords of the Draxa Empire, once arrogant in their belief that they would rule the galaxy, were now facing the reality of their defeat. Their once mighty fleets crumbled, and their leadership was captured. The tide had turned, and the Draxa were forced to make a choice: surrender or face complete annihilation. With their leader in captivity and their forces in disarray, the Draxa were left with no option but to negotiate. The surrender was swift, a recognition of humanity's newfound strength. For the first time in history, the Draxa were forced to acknowledge humanity not as a primitive species, but as a legitimate power in the galaxy. The peace talks were tense, but ultimately, the terms were clear. The Draxa would retreat from human space, and humanity would be recognized as an equal force in the galaxy. It was an unprecedented victory for a species that had once been on the brink of extinction, and it marked the end of the war. But as the dust settled, Captain Holt stood at the helm of the Aegis Prime, contemplating what had just occurred. The war was over, but humanity's true power had only just begun to reveal itself. The Starforged technology, now in humanity's hands, was a gift from their ancient ancestors, a power that could not be hidden forever. Holt knew that the galaxy had only seen a fraction of what humanity was capable of. The Draxa had been a threat, but they were just the beginning. With the Starforged technology, humanity was no longer just a species fighting for survival. They were poised to become a force for peace, a protector of the weak, and a stabilizing presence in a galaxy that had known nothing but conflict. As the human fleet began its return to the core systems, Captain Holt couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that now rested on humanity's shoulders. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. They would be a force of justice and peace, ensuring that no one could ever again threaten their way of life. The rise of humanity had begun, and with it, a new era in the galaxy. The war gods had returned, not to conquer, but to protect. The universe would never again be the same. The war had finally ended, the great conflict that had shaken the galaxy to its core, but for humanity, it was just the beginning of a new era. Captain Isabella Holt stood on the bridge of the Aegis Prime, gazing out into the vastness of space. The once impervious Draxa Empire had fallen, their mighty fleets scattered and their leadership in disarray. The victory was complete, but Holt knew that their true challenge lay ahead. The Starforged technology, the ancient weapons of war that had been humanity's secret weapon, now belonged to them. Yet, as much as humanity had fought with the strength of ancient war gods, Holt understood that true power did not lie in weapons. It lay in humanity's unity, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to survive. These qualities had shaped their victory, and they would shape the future of the galaxy. As humanity's fleet returned from the battlefields of Draxa space, a new mission began to take shape, not conquest, but protection. Holt knew the galaxy was still a dangerous place. Though the Draxa had been defeated, remnants of their forces were scattered across the stars, and new threats were always on the horizon. Humanity's Starforged ships were powerful, yes, but their true strength lay in their resolve to ensure peace, not to dominate. With this in mind, Captain Holt and the leaders of the human fleet made it their mission to forge alliances with other species, to offer protection to those who had been oppressed or threatened by the remnants of the Draxa, and to bring a sense of security to the farthest corners of the galaxy. Humanity, once a species on the brink of annihilation, had now become a force of hope in the galaxy. Their influence spread, not through force of arms, but through acts of diplomacy, defense, and the quiet strength of a people who had endured and prevailed against overwhelming odds. The war gods of the stars, long thought to be myth, were now known to the galaxy as humanity, but they were not conquerors. The ancient legends spoke of gods who sought only to protect and preserve, and in that spirit, humanity stepped into the light. They were no longer shadows hiding on the fringes of the universe. They had risen to take their place as guardians and peacemakers. In the years following the war, Captain Holt worked tirelessly to ensure that humanity's newfound power would not corrupt them. She established strict codes for the use of Starforged technology, ensuring that it would be used only for defense and peacekeeping, never as a tool for oppression or destruction. She knew that the temptation to conquer was always lurking, especially when humanity's strength was so vast. But Holt was determined that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when pushed to the brink. Now, it would see what they could do when guided by compassion and a sense of responsibility. As alliances were formed with species who had once feared humanity's rise, the universe began to change. Where once there had been empires ruled by fear and power, there now existed a network of intergalactic coalitions, united in the pursuit of peace and mutual protection. Humanity, guided by the wisdom of the war gods, became a beacon of hope for all. The once fractured and chaotic galaxy was slowly finding its balance, with humans playing a central role in that transformation. The ancient weaponry they had unearthed was no longer the key to their power. It was their determination, their courage, and their belief in a better future that defined them. As Captain Holt looked to the stars, she reflected on how far humanity had come. Once, they had been considered weak, scattered across distant planets, just another species struggling to survive. Now they had become the guardians of peace, the champions of the oppressed, the ones who stood in the way of tyranny. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity's true strength was revealed, the day the war gods returned. But Holt knew that the legacy of the war gods was not a legacy of destruction. It was a legacy of protection, of standing for those who could not stand for themselves, of fighting for the future, not just of humanity, but of all life in the galaxy. The wars had ended, but the journey was far from over. Humanity had proven itself, not through the destruction of its enemies, but through the protection of the weak and the preservation of peace. They had earned their place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as protectors, and this new era, built on the foundation of unity and compassion, would endure. The war gods had returned, not to wage war, but to guide the galaxy toward a future where peace was possible. And though the universe was vast, and many challenges still lay ahead, humanity stood ready to meet them, for they had learned the most important lesson of all: true strength lies not in the weapons one wields, but in the heart of the people who wield them.